Schools Work podcast, a podcast for everyone in education. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe that every school has the potential to be great. Whatever you do in the school, whatever your job may be, let's talk about things that make schools work.
Jason, I have a question for you. Who do you think scholars believe is the greatest teacher in world history?
Greatest teacher of all time? I mean, other than
greatest
you, Dan?
teacher that we are aware of. I mean, there's teachers out there, but that we know of.
Present company excluded.
Present company excluded.
Right. So I'm going to take a stab that the greatest teacher of all time is Socrates.
Socrates. I would say you are correct. Now, we could debate this question.
He would enjoy that.
Yeah, on another podcast. But let's just assume Socrates is considered the greatest teacher of all time. What we know about Socrates is that he did not lecture when he taught. His teaching style was asking questions. That, in fact, he was tried and convicted for corrupting the moral of the youth in Athens by going into the square and asking them, what do you believe? Why do you believe that? How do you know? What evidence do you have? What logic can you make? And he would ask them questions. He would listen, and then he'd ask them another question, and then he'd ask them another question, to the point where the students had a completely new understanding. Now we have what's called the Socratic seminar. The Socratic seminar is where teachers ask kids to talk. Today, I'd like us to talk about how we can make our classroom a little more Socratic, and why talking is more.
Can I interrupt and play devil's advocate with that?
Sure.
I hated the Socratic method in law school. And when it's about you get called on, you don't know if you're going to get called on. So all that pressure, and you get called on and you have to stand there in front of the class where they just drill questions at you and try to get you to miss one. And I think where the Socratic method is most known, right, is law school. That is probably not a good example. So I think it's important to clarify that while you guys are talking. That It's not about drilling students with questions and hoping to embarrass them in front of the class because they don't remember that MD stands for Maryland, which happened to me.
I feel like Ashley has some trauma that she wants to work through today.
And I think that we can use that non-example as we share, first of all, why student conversation is important and the things teachers can do and not do to remove the traumatic experience that Ashley had in law school. Because I think about when I heard of Socratic seminars, it's from my own children, and they loved when their teachers had Socratic seminars because they were in the middle of it discussing some important topic and, not just listening to a teacher talk all period.
Today on our Making Schools Work podcast, I am joined by our Director of Instruction, Jason Adair, and our Executive Producer for this podcast, and our Communication Specialist, Ashley Shaw. Did I butcher both those titles?
Nope.
Okay.
And I don't know about Ashley's.
I'm doing okay. So welcome. And our goal today is to help us think about how to get students to talk in class, how to help students speak, discuss, listen more. Jason, I don't know if you knew this, but the single act of letting students talk more in class can double the rate of learning, according to John Hattie's research. And yet we know that 80% of our classes are teacher talking. I'm wondering, before we get into this, why do you think that is? Why is there a gap between what we know about student talk increasing learning, and yet 80% of classes are teacher talk? Why do you think that gap persists?
I'm going to say from my own experiences is it's control, right? The more students talk, the less control I have over what is said. And so now I have to be more vulnerable, and I have to, I almost want to say work harder, because I have to take in what the student does and do something with it, versus if I talk all the time, I know what's going to be said. I know what questions I'm going to ask. I know what the answers are. And I have a lot of control over what's learned in that period, what's learned in quotations in that period, versus when I start to ask questions, it can go in lots of different directions. And so control is relinquished sometimes. That's one theory.
Yeah. Control.
What are your thoughts?
I think a lot of it is also how we were taught. I think a lot of teachers instinctively replicate what they experienced. I also think that we see teaching as a transfer of information from me to you. And your job is to take that information and that I'm giving you and memorize it and remember it, as opposed to an experience of meaning making, right? So real learning, we know, happens when you actually are doing something with the information and when you're actually taking action. The problem is, like you said, that one, relinquishes control. Two, it, how I was taught necessarily. And three, it requires some planning to think about what the kids are going to do and how they're going to talk. So,
Can I add something?
please.
Because it reminds me of something that you guys talk about a lot, which is another way to increase student learning in the classroom, which is trust. And I think it requires to do that a lot of trust, that because I know sometimes I feel like I'm the expert. They're in my class to learn. Therefore, if they already know it, they don't need to be here. So I don't trust that they can figure it out on their own.
That's interesting. We call that teacher efficacy, right? That I believe that my students can learn this if we do certain things. If I don't believe they have the capability to do it on their own, then I have to be the one explaining everything to them. That's a great point. Before we sort of get into some nuts and bolts, Jason, I just want to talk about, we have reviewed and collected over our careers, obviously, a lot of practical strategies. We also want to ensure that we're basing this on actual research. It's not just our gut. We reviewed the Met study, which was measuring effective teaching, where they watched thousands of hours of teachers and scored them on a very rigorous rubric. And they found that talking in an ELA class strongly predicts achievement. They also found that the type of discussion mattered. It wasn't just talking. They had to actually be talking in a certain academic way, using certain practices or about certain things. Another one that is more familiar to a lot of people is Hattie's synthesis of, dozens and hundreds of research studies called meta-analysis. And in that, and when you do a meta-analysis, you look in effect size, and a 0.4 effect size is your standard 1 year of learning. Well, when students have extensive classroom discussions, it goes to 0.8. So that's double the amount of learning that can happen when you include student discussion. And there's also a lot of research around students with developing language. And this is kind of obvious, right? When you're developing language, you can't just develop language from a workbook. You have to actually interact with people, and you have to actually speak and practice So our L's and our students with disabilities who struggle with language. I'd also say, and this is just me from a person who likes to read about history, humans have evolved because of our social aspects, right? We are social beings. We don't have claws. We don't have big teeth. We're not fast. We're not strong in terms of the wild. What we have is brains that have allowed us to create social structures so that we can say, hey, you go in the tree. I'm going to hold this net that we built. You scare him over there, and we're going to work together and collaborate to catch this animal, right? And all of that is because we developed communication skills, and that has evolved. So communication, speaking, listening, and learning are wrapped up in sort of being a human being. So that's something I always think about when I talk to teachers about why learning and speaking are so important. So what we're going to do, go ahead, Jason.
I like that. I like that analogy, right? Like communication is important, not just because we're told it's important because the research says it's because we use it every day in our life when we communicate about getting something done, about doing something. Yeah. We team up, we work together. We don't live in isolation.
And we're talking about getting kids to talk more. There's two things. There's learning the content through speaking and listening, which is very effective. And there's helping students become better communicators, right? Which is part of being a successful human being in the world. So you kind of can get a 2-for-1 on this one if you really make it part of your class. So we're going to go through about 7 essential practices or strategies or ways that a teacher can do this. Some of them we'll spend a little more time on. Some of them we will maybe just mention and sort of move forward for time's sake. So one of the first things that you and I, Jason, work with teachers on is asking better questions. Remember that research from the Met study said it's not just more discussion, it's quality of discussion. It's the type of questions you're asking. Tell me a little bit about some of the ways you help teachers think about their questioning.
Yeah, so many questions that teachers ask, especially off-the-cuff questions, things that haven't been planned up ahead. They have different classifications of questions. We could say low order or high order. Closed questions versus open questions, questions that have like a one-word answer. We ask, as a classroom teacher, I asked a lot of those. I didn't always ask open-ended questions that required discussion. Another thing, so I ask a closed question, I wait half a second, and then I call on a student. That practice where we ask a question, get a response, and then evaluate that it's called IRE, is what you look up in research. I initiate, the kids respond, and then I evaluate. Dan, what's 5 plus 7?
12.
Good
That
job.
took an embarrassing long time.
We'll edit out that distance.
In this class, in Jason's class, everyone lives at their own pace, Ashley, and we don't judge. Appreciate that. Thank you.
But that cadence we get into that routine as a teacher, and that cadence can be harmful if it turns into that rapid fire questioning. So we really want, when you said ask better questions, we want to support teachers to ask more open questions. Yeah. I'm going to give you some questions. Is that okay? And I just want you to think about, I'm going to give you a series of questions, just a few questions, and then I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to make a cut, and then I'm going to tell you some other difference. And I want you to tell me the differences.
Are they harder than 5 plus 7? Because if
I don't need you to answer them, I just want you to ultimately in your head be categorizing them.
Okay.
You with me? So they're basically they're going to fall into 2 categories. So here's
Okay.
the first category of questions, and I want you to listen to the difference. So here's some questions in this category might be, how does the character's decision connect to the theme? What evidence from the text supports your interpretation? Why do you think colonists were willing to go to war? How does this experiment connect to what we know about energy transfer?
So as I'm listening to,
Yep.
what I'm hearing is questions that have more than one answer. That
Okay.
I have to sort of connect different ideas together in order to form an answer. I sort of have to think about two different things and then form an answer based on multiple pieces of information. And there might not be one answer to those.
Great. So here's the other category. Ready?
Yeah.
What is the dependent variable? What operation should you use first? What
Right.
problem does the character face?
Right.
Who is the main character? When
Right.
did the American Revolution begin? You can
Boom.
get the right.
Yeah. I feel like those are things that like I can click on a file in my brain, open it, and it just pops up. Right. Like on an iPhone, I could just find the icon, click on it, and I see it. And I'm like, there's the answer.
Yeah.
It's a right there answer.
Yeah. And so
I
the
think-
category titles are focusing questions and funneling questions.
And with,
Can you picture which is which?
well, focusing, I guess. Okay, funneling, I'm thinking of like a funnel, everything goes straight to one, right? Everything goes into one idea.
Yeah.
So funneling would be those right there questions.
Yeah.
And then focusing means you have to try to see something more clearly and understand, see exactly what's there. And it takes more work for your eyes or for the camera lens to sort of adjust and figure it out. So and it helps you, I guess focusing is like understanding. So you have to really understand it to see it clearly. So you're helping me see it clearly with those questions.
Yeah. In the illustration I use a lot with teachers is a GPS versus a map. Funnels you.
Right.
A
Which
GPS,
one?
right?
A GPS.
A
That's
GPS
right.
literally funnels you. Turn left here, turn right here, turn left here. Then you pull up at the Zaxby's, right? Wherever you were trying to go. Versus a map, you're like, you have all these different options and you get to decide how you get there. And so as a teacher, I encourage teachers. I did it in, if you listen back to a previous podcast to that we have, to write down all of the questions, like use your cell phone, record your lesson, push record, write down every question you ask and see if you can categorize it into a focusing question or a funneling question. If you have a coach in your school or an assistant principal, have them come into your classroom, tell them the differences and ask them, hey, I need you to listen to this for me. Another teacher, something like, we want to ask focusing questions so the kids are having to think, process in order to formulate their own understanding of the knowledge versus I funnel them towards the correct answer.
You're talking about meaning making on the kids' part.
Right.
Asking questions where kids have to make meaning, which is what we were talking about earlier. Who's making the meaning? Is the teacher making the meaning or is the kid building and understanding? And those open-ended questions do that.
Just one more concept on just before we move off of this. When we ask better questions, we have to provide more wait time because it takes time for students to formulate answers. And if they're not rapid recall questions, we have to give kids time. And so that's something that we need to keep in teachers' minds is wait. If I'm going to ask a focusing question, I need to give students time to think time.
Excellent. There's research that shows just waiting 3 seconds can increase the length and complexity of student responses. There's a tip that someone gave me, and I don't necessarily recommend you do this in real life, but he said, imagine smoking a cigarette. He said, wait for the time it takes to light, puff, and blow out a cigarette. I've never smoked before in my life, obviously. So I have to just imagine what that is, as do you, Jason. But there's certain mental tricks.
Wait, as do I.
No,
like
no,
that.
no, Ashley, that you're an inveterate smoker. No, I kid. And then I guess the other thing with that last thing on asking good questions is there's this great tool that I heard from our friends at the Harvard Project Zero, where they said from the book, what the book is called, Building a Culture of Thinking. And they say, what makes you say that? If you're in a classroom and you just ask your students, what makes you say that after they give an answer? You build that into your instruction. It's going to force kids to really think about what they're saying and support it. And then you teach them to ask that of each other. All right, we got to keep going though, because we have a few of these to get to. I want to talk about a bunch of them. How do we help as a teacher? How do I decrease the amount of time I'm talking? So the next sort of practice is reduce the amount of talk that you do in class. We are going to talk and want to talk 70 to 80% of the time. I think it's just a natural instinct. There's moves that we can do as a teacher to try to fix that, to try to change that. I'm wondering if you have any ideas, Jason, about if I'm a teacher and I know I want to reduce talk, but what can I do to help myself?
I mean, I think the quickest one is the use of timers, whether it's this timer on your cell phone, timers that magnet to your board. I like those more than the cell phone because the kids see it too. It's like, guys, I'm not going to lecture for more than 10 minutes. Set the timer. They're watching it too. If I'm going to do a turn and talk at least every 5 minutes, you set that timer. And when it dings, if you haven't done a turn and talk, you're like, no, it's a turn and talk. There's that's one of the most practical ways to consciously control the amount of time you speak in a row, right? Like we know kids' attention spans are short, they're getting shorter. If we talk more than 10 minutes, it's not like, I don't want to listen to somebody talk for more than 10 minutes and I'm a grown adult.
They say they say the attention span should be about the equal of the age.
Right. Plus or minus a couple, but right.
Plus or minus a couple. And then I guess you could say with kids today, who knows?
But no matter what, if you're talking more than 10 minutes, they're tuning you out.
Them and everybody else.
Right.
That's why, and the videos that we see on YouTube and TikTok, most people look at a video and if it says more than 10 minutes, I'm looking at my fantasy. I want fantasy tips. And every once in a while, it's like 55-minute episode on sleepers. I'm like, oh man, I can't do that. But then it's like 10 minutes, the 5 fantasy people you need to have. Click, I'll watch that. So the students, and what I heard you say is it doesn't have to be like a activity after 5 minutes. It could be a turn and talk. It could be a journal for what are you thinking? It could be a poll where you poll everybody, and use that poll to have the kids generate questions, or you just have a question that they have to respond to, but something where you force yourself to stop.
And they are processing what happened in that last 5 to 10 minutes. Something happened, some information was disseminated. They need to process and internalize. And that's why turn and talks, polls, journals, any of those things can be utilized as a mental break for them to turn their ears off and turn their brains on.
To make meaning and to process what was said. And then, we also
take ownership of it.
We also have that problem where we have little Sally front row who raises her hand every 2 seconds to answer every question. And maybe her friend over here who also likes to answer questions. And then that's it. right? So you ask questions. You might be asking a great question, a high order question. One strategy is to always ask if someone else can respond to that. Who can respond to that? Can somebody add to that? Then there's silence. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts. I know I see that all the time where the teachers confront silence. And that kind of, I know for me, like it makes me nervous, right? When I ask questions and try to get them talking and they're silent. That's just something, it's a challenge, and you have to really use wait time is very powerful. I'm wondering, like, if you've ever seen anything else.
I think that's the value in a turn and talk too, right? It's safer for me to turn and talk with one person than to talk with the whole class. And so that turn and talk, then as a teacher, I can listen. And then I might even strategically say to the student, hey, when I carried 3 sticky notes around. When I call for sticky note number 1, can you share what you guys just talked about? When I call for sticky note number 2, would you guys share? Or I'm going to call on you in a couple minutes to share that. I love your thing. I love the discussion that's going on here. Would you mind sharing when I call in the class? And that would you mind is really a you are going to, but sounds nicer when I say, would you mind?
So going back to Ashley's point about the Socratic seminar, the Socratic learning,
the Socratic trauma experience,
the Socratic trauma experience, where she was, interrogated in front of the entire class based on what she was supposed to have read, which we know Ashley did read, but maybe she didn't quite understand it all. And
I understood it all. I just got nervous and forgot what Marilyn's code was. That's all.
Could have been a medical doctor. I mean, there's so many things that MD could stand for.
And then did somebody make fun of you afterwards? Like, did they say you took too long saying 7 + 5 = 12? Or did they let you be? I'm just curious to know if they're...
I'd rather them make fun of me because it's more awkward when they don't and feel sorry for you.
It sounds like that's something that maybe you picked up there. Anyway, I'm thinking about that whole model that you talked about. I ask a question to the whole class. I wait. Maybe a kid responds. I ask a question. I wait. Maybe a kid responds. Maybe we need to not use that as much.
Yep. and maybe it looks something like this. I ask a question and I tell the kids, I'm going to give you 30 seconds of silent think time. Right. No hands in the air, nothing, just silent think time. And I established this process where, kids' hands automatically go in there. You're like, oh, think time means hands down. And that way I eliminate some pressure. And then after that think time, I'm like, hey, turn and talk with shoulder partner or your face partner or however you're sitting, right? Share what you're thinking. Then I can, as a teacher, I can do some formative assessment. What were they thinking? I can listen. I can, kids have different levels of answers. I can scaffold the answers as I get. And I don't call on that highest student every time. Or, I always had a bailout student. If, I was being evaluated in the back and I needed a right answer to come out, I'm calling on this kid. And then I look brilliant as a teacher, but I called on, the 5 smartest kids in the room versus.
And that goes back
to an opportunity.
That goes back to like, say what's in my head. Like the talk in that class is the game. Say what's in my head.
Yeah, the question is, guess what's in my head? Yep.
Guess what's in my head. Yeah. And maybe 4 kids can do that with confidence, but your L students, your special ed students, your kids who are just off that day, or just, take a second to remember 7 plus. They just need
They can do it, but it takes more time than you have in your brain because they're literally translating it from English to their language in their head, doing whatever it is in their head, and then translating it back. And that takes more time than.
And so that's a structure. That's a lesson structure that maybe we want to avoid. And full disclosure, that's a natural way to teach. And I do model lessons and I find myself self-consciously, okay, I'm back into that. So and I have to reflect and pause. So that is, I think, a default that is hard to sometimes stop yourself from. So then the question is, okay, so our next one is student-led discussion formats, is creating formats and structures for discussion. I'm going to give you an example of a great one. I learned from our colleague, Deb Cullen, who has a great podcast that you can go back and listen to about student engagement, where it's a structure where there's an A, a B, and a C. You post a question on your board, maybe a question like based on what you just learned. So we just learned about colonization, and your question is, who benefited the most from colonization? And then everybody has 30 seconds to a minute to think time. A answers the question. B builds on and extends the answer. And C has to listen and summarize what A and B says. Then they rotate. Now, whoever was A is B, whoever was B is C, whoever was C is A. So now, once again, new A answers the question, that new B extends, and C has to listen and summarize. And they're in these small triads. And it really builds confidence. It builds ownership, and it's short. So like, even if they're struggling, they're not sitting there trying to answer, a big essay. That's just one structure that is really interesting. Anything else that comes to your mind? I'm interested also in math class, Jason, like structures that you've used to help kids talk and build discussion into math.
I think, first of all, I kind of love that structure and I might steal it. And thanks to Deb Cullen, I think that in a math classroom, the structure that we want sometimes it's similar to that, in that maybe we have problems that we're solving and two students, one paper. Person who has the marker isn't allowed to talk, or the pen, if it's on the board somewhere, if it's a vertical space, if it's on the person who has the pencil, one paper, one pencil, two students. The person with the pencil isn't allowed to talk. Things like that, that forces the person to talk. And then if I have the pencil and I want to talk, I have to give it up. So now that student's doing the writing, but I'm doing the talking. And so that can be a strategy that strategically forces discussion between students. The key is you want to force talking, right? And in a meaningful way. So that's something that's working its way through math classrooms a lot now, is their vertical non-permanent surfaces. So they're vertical spaces in the room where the kids are in triads doing work, and that marker idea, one marker, student who has the marker is not allowed to talk, is something that's causing a lot of engagement to go up a lot in math classrooms.
You talked about vertical non-permanent space. That is a structure leads to more talk, especially in math, but can be done anywhere.
Yep.
So the idea is have a whiteboard that can be erased. So not chart paper, but a whiteboard. It's vertical, not laid on the table. So the students have to stand up around it. So you might have 3 students around a vertical space with an eraser and a marker. I'm imagining a English class where you might have a sentence and you want students to revise the sentence for compound, complex, for sentence variety. I want you to compound sentence, a complex sentence, a dependent clause, an independent clause, and a positive phrase. And that could be done many different ways. There's no one answer, right? There's a million different ways you can create sentences like that. So if one kid has to write but can't talk, and the other 2 kids can only talk, they have to give him ideas on how to revise those sentences.
Yeah.
So it's not a discussion, but it is a discussion, right?
It is. And it's students talking, right? And sharing it's that higher level of talk. Well, depending on what you put on the board, right? I can make them write 5 compound words too, right? I can make it low order, but the thing I put on the thing I make them do on that board matters. I can add these 5 numbers, right? That's not interesting, and it doesn't stimulate discussion. So the thing that's on the board matters, and that would vary in all classes. Like I can say, write all the states in their capitals, or I can have them interpret something, a graph. But once it happens, and it allows them to look around and scan the room, if they're struggling getting started, they can scan the room, and that gives them a starting place, which is always a good thing for lots of different groups of students.
And that almost goes back to that Met research on discussion alone isn't right as effective as quality discussions, quality conversation around how can we solve this problem. Might have different ways to solve it, where there's multiple roads. So you share a way, I share a way, you share a way, I share a way.
Versus first I did this, then I did this, then I did this, versus this is why I did this. It's the difference between me making a recipe and my wife making a recipe. I'm like, well, I followed the directions. First I put in this, then I did this, then I did this. I'm just following the recipe, versus my wife's like, chef, she knows what she's doing, and she's telling you, well, I put this in here because it's going to do this.
And you say, yes, chef.
Yep. Yes, chef.
Yes, chef.
Just like
the bear.
That's it.
Okay. So the next strategy I want to talk about is how to help scaffold kids who struggle with talking. Some students are shy. Some students don't like to talk in front of others. And some students have actual disabilities that are part of their IEP, that they struggle with oral language. And then there's other students who come to us from other countries who don't speak English very well, and it's a new language for them. All of those students are going to struggle in a talk-heavy class at first and need some explicit help. One strategy that I see used a lot is this idea of sentence stems for conversation. So if I'm having students in a circle doing a Socratic seminar, I'm going to give them specific stems. And it might depend a little bit on what we're trying to do. If I want them to cite evidence, like I'll say, here's a sentence stem. I think blank because blank, or the reason I believe this is blank. One fact supports my point is blank, right? And we also want to teach kids how to listen and talk to each other. Might give them stems that say, I agree with blank because, I disagree respectfully because. Sometimes kids need help expressing how to listen. I might have one that says, could you repeat that, please? Or can you help me understand blank? These aren't a silver bullet. They're something that can just give kids who are a little bit more reticent and a little bit more unwilling to talk a scaffold, something to get started with. And it's also something that can be used in writing as well. So I know that's working with English and social studies classes where there is those sit in a circle and ask a question, and I want the kids to engage in those conversations. Those can be very helpful. They're called,
And I think they apply in math and science classes too, Dan. Is those sentence starters? I agree with you. I disagree. I think those fit in all disciplines.
Anchor charts. You can use these as anchor charts as well. You can have certain key ones that are always up there on the board so that you don't have to pass them out, and you can make them part of your regular daily instruction.
And when you don't hear it, you can point, hey, can you rephrase that using one of those sentence starters so that you start to build that culture? I think that's on our next one. You build a culture for all voices, right?
Yeah.
Is when kids are respectful in their disagreements. Lots of times kids won't talk because they know there's someone smarter than them in the room, and they're just going to wait till that person talks.
Yes.
And instead, we want to build a culture for all voices, and having kids share respect is important.
That's exactly right. And that has to be taught and it has to be reinforced. That's our next practice, is building a culture of all voices, culture in how students talk to each other, because kids will be mean. Kids are mean in their world. It's unfortunate, but it's part of growing up, it seems. And we can't necessarily combat that all the time because they're not in our class all the time. In this classroom, this is how we talk to each other. In this classroom, we do not accept these types of responses. We do not speak. What we do expect when we talk to each other is listening. What does listening look like? What does active listening look like? Like, that can be a lesson. There's certain practices, people who are familiar with Teach Like a Champion, where they talk about tracking with your eyes. And they are very intentional in teaching students how to look at the person who is talking. And that is not easy to build. But when you get there, that's a culture, right? That's the culture of this classroom.
And I think those can be co-created, right? Like, it's not something that's dictated by the teacher. The kids know how they're supposed to behave. They just don't always do it in the moment. And so at the beginning of your year, when you say, I love what you said, tell me what listening looks like. When we're having a discussion, tell me what active listening looks like. When you disagree with someone, what are some phrases that you can say? That way the kids are saying it all. And then when they don't live up to those norms at some point, you can point, hey, didn't we all create these together? And that creates that safe space where they're okay being wrong. They're vulnerable. When the answer is not quite apparent, they're still free to give their thoughts. I think sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
The other trend I think that's coming across, and I think it started in math classrooms, but I've seen it leak into science social studies, is starting with a low hanging fruit question. Like, what do you know, looking at this picture, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? You know, so that they're anticipating something, but it's an easy question where I can literally notice anything. I can wonder anything, versus then when we read the story, I've got to use content knowledge to deal with it. When I just notice and I wonder, anything's fair game, and it can serve as a good way to warm students up so that when I ask a more vulnerable question or a harder question, they're more willing to participate because they participated already today.
Right. And you're building the skill of communicating, and you can reinforce those expectations, how we talk to each other in the culture of this classroom. And it's with something that is accessible to everybody, that most anybody can probably do and build interest. Let's go to our final step, our final practice, which is not our final. Let's go to the next one, which is helping students reflect on their participation. This one is not done very often and is one of the most powerful tools that teachers have. Metacognition. Anyone who listens to me on any of these podcasts know I'm a huge fan of metacognition. Metacognition is when students think about their thinking. It's when they know what they don't know. When you know what you don't know, your ability to learn that is exponentially increased. So being reflective and self-aware of your communication in this classroom. Today, I didn't really share much. Okay. I wonder why that was. What's stopping me? Today, I was in a group in which this guy dominated the conversation, and that wasn't great. And I didn't really enjoy that. Let me mark that and reflect on that and why that is. Today, I am going to try to be more reflective and answer at least, and respond to 3 questions from either the teacher or the students. So when the students are reflecting on how they're doing, their skill set will increase dramatically. That's my 2 cents on reflection and participation.
Yeah, I think
And
that's a new move in schools, is really to focus on that.
Yeah. Ashley?
Can I bring this full circle back to Socrates and say that Socrates, one of my favorite Socrates quotes is he said, the only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing. So it's good for the metacognition. It's helps you develop those skills when you do think about the fact that you don't know what you don't know. So.
Ashley, dang.
Dropping some knowledge.
Bringing her fastball with the Socrates quote. Well done. That's great. And it's 100% true, right? Knowing that you know nothing means that you're aware of what you know and puts you in a position to learn. Jason, this has been really helpful. And have thought about how I'm going to help teachers with their increasing talk. I definitely am going to try to increase their awareness of the types of questions they're asking. Maybe I'll bring a funnel like you have and hold up a funnel when they start funneling questions. And then they'll yell at
Favorite
me,
ways to coach teachers.
kick me out of their classroom.
No, I mean, once you've had the discussion, visual cues are important, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't realize when you're in the midst of teaching, you don't realize. That's why I love that reflection is our last one, because that's what we want teachers to do too, right? We want students to become more reflective. We want teachers. I want them to ask questions like, what percentage of the words did I say today in the classroom? That's a great reflective question as a teacher when you look at this. When I ask a question, did that funnel them towards the answer, or did it focus them? That gives me that metacognition that improves, just like that improves student behavior in learning, that improves teacher. When I'm metacognitive as a teacher, that improves my teaching.
And the best way to do it, of course, is videotape yourself and see how much of the video is you talking, how much of the video is your students talking, what type of questions you're asking. Just look at those 3 things and you will probably make huge changes to your classroom just from being aware of that. And then maybe as a PLC, look at some of these ideas and choose one, or individually choose one to really focus on and really get a lot better at. Before we leave, any quotes from Socrates you want to share with us?
I mean, I feel like I already gave a really good one. I don't have to quote his entire biography. Is that entire right?
About Plato?
One of those said, know thyself, right?
Know thyself. Okay, good.
That's the only one I have. Mine is not as deep as Ashley's, but I think we could, at the end of this, ask the teachers that to know themselves and to reflect on that, their instruction, so that we increase with the goal of increasing student talk.
Which Greek philosopher said this, Jason? If you build it, they will come. Everybody.
Field of Dreams.
That's what I think. I'm like Roy something, the dad.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to this episode brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit sreb.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.